I'm going to take this time right now to entertain any questions we might have on the lab that just finished up. So if you have any questions, you know, I was in here when the message wasn't up, so I'm always available as long as I don't put the message that I'm out of the studio. But if you have any specific questions, now would be the time to do it. Okay, I guess there's none, so I'm going to assume that everyone just rock and rolled right through there. Well, too quick there. Raleigh, you're on the air with a question.
Yeah, I cannot get, I finished the lab and I went in to try to do some concatenation. And it keeps coming up with invalid
Token?
Yeah, invalid. Invalid.
Well, did you...
5 zeros and a 1. It says invalid command. It's got the 2 straight up and down lines hyphenated.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we... did you put a space between the letter and the concatenation?
Yes.
Huh. Well, why don't we take that one up on the next lab break? And
okay.
You can call me up on the phone.
Okay.
All right, and I'll just sit down at the terminal and we'll walk through it together. All right, sir?
Okay. All righty.
All right. So, with that in mind, yeah, some of the questions just, you know, in order to keep the flow of the class going, I have to defer, and I hope no one gets offended by that because it's not meant that way. All right, well, let's talk about formatting reports or form panels. You'll notice here that we start out with your basic manual typewriter. As things go on, you'll see that our little picture of the typewriter will get a little more modern. But right now, we're going to talk about basically navigating QMF panels. We're going to do some simple report tailoring. And we're going to talk about the form.main panel. There's, I think, 16 panels altogether. Form.main is like a little peephole into a bunch of them, and we'll discuss that as we go through this unit. Okay, some of the things that can be controlled by you in QMF that you don't really have as much control over in SQL, and in fact you can't do in SQL, things like page titles and things like that. If you were just doing that, say, through Spoofy, which is the direct input to DB2, not using QMF, you don't have titles and editing and totals and subtotals and such. So we're going to talk about that. And keep in mind the QMF, Query Management Facility, is by nature a report product. And so we can do all of the headings, the spacing, titling, headings and footings and such, do the commas, dollar signs, and that kind of stuff, totals and subtotals, depending on how we control break, and some built-in functions. Now, these built-in functions, what we're going to see as we go on, we can do them either in QMF or in SQL. And as we get through the course, what we're going to do is discuss when we want to do the functions in the various areas and what would be some things to take into account in making our decision. So, to start out, the way this is going to work is we're going to start out with a sample query. Again, in this particular query, we built a results table with 4 columns, department, job, name, and salary, from Q.staff. And as you recall, this is the same as saying where the department equals 15 or 20. So we've made it department in 15, 20. And the job is not equal to manager. We want to order by department, low to high, job within department, high to low, and name within job and department from low to high, ascending. Remembering that if you don't put in a specific direction for the order by, it defaults to ascending. So what we have as a result, they've taken the name out just to keep the visual from getting too busy. But this would be our simple report. If you want to see the entire thing, it's on the bottom of page 3-6. And that would be how it would come out. Now, we have to say that if our boss asked us for this report, it's a little bit basic vanilla, and we might like to spice it up a little bit, doing some things. So using this generic query and this results table that was created, we're going to go on and discuss the different options we have to make the report a little bit fancier. Okay. In fact, we want to make it like this. One brief note: this particular visual is from page 3.6, We're going to be discussing the form.main. And if you look on 3-7, you will see the entire form.main panel as it would appear. For the sake, again, of keeping the visuals readable when we broadcast, we're only going to be showing bits and pieces of form.main, but you might want to stick a piece of paper or dog-ear the page on 3-7 in case you're wondering where the various things fall into place on the screen itself. And on 3.7, it would be your default form.main panel, and we're going to discuss how we would alter that to get something like this. You notice we've changed department to department number. Okay, the name, we're keeping the name out because that doesn't really matter. Okay, we've also suppressed the department 15. We don't need to see it each time. We've added some control break text and a summation on the control break itself. So let's see how we go about doing all of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to work our way through the report, and at the end we'll have something like this. And then there's a lab so that you too can try it. Now, let's first talk about what goes on with a report, okay? You come in here and you're on the flag panel, or the QMF home panel. You press PF6, as you all did for the lab, I hope, and got into the query area, all right? Remember, the query area is one of those temporary areas, all right, where you write your query. If you sign off and don't save it, it's white. So you got to save that query. So once we're into the query area, we write our SQL in the query area and hit PF2, which will run the query, okay? Now, what we're seeing here is just the report. A report doesn't exist in and of itself. When you run the query, okay, or strike PF2, what's going to happen is this goes out to the database, collects your desired results rows and columns, and populates another temporary area called the data area. Now, data plus the form give you a report. Now, if you hit PF2 and you don't specify a form to use, and we'll talk about when to specify and that kind of stuff, you're going to get a default format that QMF puts together for you. And that's why they have the arrow going right to report. But keep in mind, what it's really doing is it's populating this data area, and in this particular case, since we didn't specify a format, it's formatting a default format that you see on page 3-7, and together they make up the report, all right? So data plus form makes up a report. Now this becomes rather nice. Let's just put my data back here. We were getting a little bit much with the arrows now. So the data plus the form does the report. Now let's say I don't like the report for some reason, or we get something like this that we want to change, okay? I can then push PF9, display the form, come in here and alter it, so we'll call it Form B, and then hit PF12, and it'll give me a new report with different formatting information, and that could be from going to this to say this kind of a deal. And we could do all that with just changing the format. Now what makes this nice is that you don't have to go and do another hit to the database and incur all the costs associated there. You've got your data area, and that remains consistent. So you can just keep looping around, okay, and until you get the report in the desired fashion that you want. So that's important, okay? That's how it works. Now, again, going back to page 3-7, you can see we're only showing the first two columns of the panel. So again, if you want to know where all this fits into the big picture, as it were, 3-7 will show you. We're only going to show those specific areas that we're happen to be discussing at the time. So now we're going to talk about the column headings. And as I said here, if you did this, QMF would give you a default format and give you a report, much like we saw on page 3-6. Okay? But that's not really what we want. If you remember, we changed our department to department number, okay, and We also want to change the name to read employee name, and so on. So let's look at how we do that, okay? If you look down at the bottom of 3-10, they want department number, employee name, job and salary remain consistent. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we go into form.main, or again, we could hit PF9 to get us in there, all right? And we just go and type over what we don't like or what we want to change. Now, in this case, you notice the red is what's been added. The underscore will not appear, although the little period here will, okay? But the underscore won't appear. That is an indication to QMF of where to break this guy down. So in this case, department and the period would be on the first line, and number would be on the second. Again, employee name would be on the first and name on the second. These won't appear on the column headings, the underscores. So with that in mind, you just go into form.main and do it up the way you want it. And if you see on the bottom of 3-11, and again now, mind you, you don't have to hit PF2 again, all right? You can just go in and hit PF12 because the data is already out there. And it's the data plus the form that make up a report. So we go in there. Now we might want to see how it looks. If we were to hit PF12, we would get the results as we see on page 3-11. Some things. Maximum column heading width is 40, just some notes. And you can only have 8 of these underscores, which would then make 9 column lines. Okay? So with that in mind, now we've changed the headings, and we're getting ever closer to what we want here. Okay? And that's going to be our goal here. We want to get this report, and of course here would be employee name. So that's what we're working for. Okay, so that took care of the column headings for us, and now they're all set. Now, the other thing we can control is the spacing between the columns. Sometimes it's nice to set a column off by itself, maybe give it a little bit more influence on the report, make it stand out a little bit. So again, if you go back to page 3-7, you'll see the default is 2. All right. Now, this is important here, and let me try and bring this up here. Okay. Let's see how that works. Raleigh, can you see that okay over the satellite?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. I just wanted to do a check and make sure this is broadcasting okay. Sometimes the white washes out. Okay, when we're talking about indentation, we're talking about the space between these dotted lines, because they're what's going to give us our indentation, as it were. We're not talking about, say, the R in number and the J in job. We're talking about the field width. And if we go back, let me just turn the page here back a little bit. If we go back here on the form.main panel, now I know you can't see that, so let me focus it. The width is controlled by the width column on form.main. Okay? So that is what's going to give you the width of your columns, and with that comes along these dotted lines here that'll show you the width of the columns. So when we're talking about indentation, that's where we're talking about, and that's how the spacing is going to be controlled by the system. Notice the default here is 2, and that means there's going to be 2 spaces between each one of these indentations. Well, how do we change that? Let's say in this case, what we want to do is kind of set job off a little bit. So to set the job apart from the other columns, we're going to have to change the indentation here, and that'll be between department number and job, and change the indentation here between job and employee name. With that in effect, we can get the job a little bit out on its own, and we do that by just typing over a new indentation, and we've added 2 additional positions on either side of the job. So that makes the job stand out. Again, you can hit PF12 because you don't have to run the query again. The data's already been saved by your first hit on PF2. Excuse me. And you get the report you see on 3-13. All right. And you'll notice here on 3-13 that the job column, and let's see if we can get this up there. Oh, yeah, that's not bad. There. The job column now has been set off from both name and number. Okay, and it's important that if you want to set something off like that, you hit it on both sides of the column that you want to set it off. So that's indentation. Now let's talk about the column width. Now you remember, if you go back to 3-7, the column width on job was set to 5. If you look at the reports on 3-12 and 13, you see that there's 5 dashes under the column job. That's to indicate that it's a 5 wide field. All right? Now, we've gone ahead and we've said, you know what, we'd like to call it job classification instead of just job. Makes it look a little bit better. But noting that this is set at 5, if we look down at the report on page 3-14, you see that it just came out to job class because it can only handle 5 wide. It's not a smart truncator either. It just chops it off after 5. So it's important that you keep into account what you want to do with this thing. So that means that we can never have the title job classification. No, that's not what that means. It just means we have to do some additional things here to fit in that big word on the header. And to do that, since classification is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 wide, we've changed the width to 14. Far more than we need for the data, but we have to be able to fit that word classification in there. And keep in mind, now the indentation is going to be from, because classification is going to take up all 14 positions, you'll now have 14 dashes, and since back here we changed this to 4 and 4, it'll be that 14 dashes that's calculated as your column width default. Okay? And if you look at page 3-15, you can see the result of what happened. Now this was just strictly an example, so we're going to go back and assume that the column is just job and it's back to 5. That was just to show you what happens if you go over your column, the width of your column with a header. It'll just truncate it right off. Okay. Now you notice editing the data, we've got L2, which says it's numeric with 2 decimals of precision. All right. Again, it's got, let's go back and take a look at the report we have here. There we go. Still pretty basic vanilla, right? If we go to the report we're looking for, it's got commas, it's got dollar signs, and so on. Well, how do we put that in? Okay, let me find the slide first. There it is. Well, we go to the edit code, and again, refer back to 3-7 if you want to see where this all stacks up in the grand scheme of things. We change the L2, which is just strictly numeric with 2 decimals of precision, to a D2, and what the D2 will do is change it to dollar signs with the commas and such. Now, if you look down at page 3-17, you see once we put this D2 in there, okay, it produces asterisks, okay? And that is because, if we come back here, salary is only 10 positions wide, all right? When we change this to D2, we look down, and we're going to have to handle all 10 positions, plus the commas, plus the dollar signs. Now, before anyone hits the question light, because I've done this class so many times, some call in and say, well, wait a second, if I look back, let's see if we can get one in good focus here. Well, let's do it up here. Let me find it. There we go. If I look back, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It should fit, right? Because it's 10 positions. Well, what they don't tell you is you've also got to account for the sign. And that's the 11th position here that's not going to be shown in positive numbers. So when we do that D2, we've got enough for everything but the sign. And we see on the bottom of 3-15 that sign causes an I'm sorry, not 3-15, 3-17, that sign causes an overflow condition, and you get asterisks. Now, mind you that if only, say, 2 out of 5 overflowed, you get correct data for the ones that didn't overflow and the asterisks for those that were too big for the field. So it's only going to overflow. It's not an all or nothing deal. It does it row by row in the results set. So what we're going to have to do now is change the width to 11 to hold the sign, and we now get the report we see on page 3-18. So now we've got, it's getting ever and ever closer, and if you look on page 3-15, let's see what we got here. We're getting closer. We've now got our columns the way we want them. We've got the dollar signs, but we still don't have summation and that kind of stuff. So we're getting closer, but we're not all the way there, folks. So let's look at sequencing the data, and as we go along, we will get to the report that we're looking for. Notice there's two columns, num and seq, for number and sequence. Okay? We can override the sequence. Of course, when they first come out, they're going to be the same by default. The order in which, this is the order that they were put into the results table. That's the order that they're going to be displayed in your report. Okay? We look at the default report with default sequence, and that's what we've been getting all along. But if we look back to, let's see here, 3 dash, I don't want to keep flipping back and forth because it's getting too much. If we look back to page 3-15, we want to do some other stuff with it. How would we sequence this? Like, let's say we wanted salary first. All right? Do we have to do another hit to the database? Oh, no. We can just change the sequencing around. And now, in this case, we've got a couple things to talk about. First off, now the employee name is going to be first. The salary is going to be second. But then you say to yourself, but wait a minute, there's 2 3s. Well, if you have a duplicate number, it's going to, within that duplicate, look over here and see. So they're both 3s. So in this case, department number would be 3rd and job would be 4th. All right? So if they're duplicate sequence numbers, it then has a secondary lookup over here to see which is the lower number. And based on that, it will then populate it as you wish. And if you look at page 3-20, you see the rearranged report. Okay? Again, this is for example, so we're now going to switch it back to that. We don't, our report didn't require us to resequence everything. So we've talked about that. So our report's getting close, but still we don't have the totals for each department and such. How do we get around that? Well, we've got what's called usage codes. The usage codes include sum, average, min, max, count, and omit. Okay, and we're going to go through these through a series of examples. All right, keeping in mind, for now, remember the most important thing for you all to remember is what do I want in my results table, okay, and how do I want it on the report. A sum in and of itself is only going to give one result, all right, an average, similar, and that kind of thing. So let's keep that in mind as we go on, because we may want detail, not just the aggregated data. So we've got to, again, keep in mind, and this is kind of a segue into when we talk about, do I do something like a sum? We can do a sum in both, like an average. Let's use a better one. We can do an average in both SQL or QMF. When do I want it in SQL? When do I want it in QMF? Well, remembering that the report is data plus the form combined to give us a report, all right? It all comes down to what do I want in my results table. If you ever may want the detail information, don't use these in the SQL, use it in QMF. Because then we've got the data there and we choose only to display the average and so on. And omit, of course, will just omit something from the report. So it may be in the results set, but I don't want to see it over here on the report. But it's in the data area. Remember, data plus form equals report. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit before the end of this class. So let's look at some usage codes we've got here. And you see here we've chosen to omit the employee name. Now, when I say omit the employee name, for 5 points, true or false, does that take it out of the results table? 5 points. Going once. Okay, got 2 in. I got to see. Endicott's in first. Endicott, you're on the air?
No, it doesn't.
That's correct for 5 points, and let me write that down. Thank you, Endicott. Raleigh, if that was your answer, if you could please hit the cancel button. If not, I'll get to you shortly. Endicott is smoking, you guys. Got to get on the stick. Okay. So it's not going to take it out of the results table, but it will suppress it from being in the report. Okay. Now the summation is going to give us a grand total at the end of the report. And by putting these on, if we look on page 3-22, we get the results of this newly implemented usage code. And we see not much has changed with the exception of, let's see if we can get this up here. With the exception of, we've added this double-barred line, and we've got a grand total. And again, the sum, you'll notice, is going to use the same edit codes as its component parts. So whatever you set those up to is going to be carried forward to the summation. So that's something to keep in mind. Now then, so we've seen how to put the grand total in, getting ever and ever closer to that desired goal report we've got. What are some other things? Well, if you remember, we wanted to have these things grouped together and such. Well, let's talk about group. What do we have here now? We have group on the department number, and now we have salary with sum, and we're omitting these two guys, job and employee name. So what's going to happen now? Well, one thing you got to remember, if you use the group code, okay, everything has to have a usage code. It has to be either omit or something. The reason being, we were talking today about the relational and everything is one-to-one on a row and column intersection. You can only have one value. Well, if I had put these in, if I had left out the omit, all right, what would I have? I would have one department number, and I made a group of it, but I would have many of these. So it'd be a one-to-many relationship. So I've got one row for the department number, and then I'm trying to maybe stick 6 employees in that one row. That doesn't work. Okay, can't handle that. So if you use the group, you can't have any blank usage codes. And if you look at the bottom of page 3-22, not all the way at the bottom, you'll see department number 15. Let's see if we can bring that one up. Okay, let's see how that looks. We've got a group here for department 15, and we've got the sum salary for that department, and the sum for 20, and the grand total sum. Now, for 5 points, the question on the bottom of 3-23, is the following form valid? Why or why not? So for 5 points, who wants to give that a shot? Going once? Okay, Raleigh. Go ahead, Raleigh, you're on the air.
No, it's not valid because you got 2 blanks.
That's correct. Thank you, Raleigh, and let's see. That puts you on the board with 5, Raleigh. Thank you. Okay, Poughkeepsie, if that was an answer to the question, could you cancel it? Okay, thanks. All right, so that's not a valid form because you don't have the usage codes on name and salary. And again, a lot of this is just trying to put this all together in your head about what's going on. If you look at that form, you're going to have one row for the department. As you see, let's see, do I have this still up here? Okay. Let's zoom out a little bit here. Okay. Let's see. Raleigh, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm just checking because sometimes it washes, so I don't want to just be putting up a bright white screen at you. Okay. You notice here, we've got one department number, which we would get here with the group. we put a sum on the salary as we see over here on the other screen. So we're going to get one salary sum for each group. So that's okay. You've still got the one-to-one relationship and, of course, the grand total. But when we come down here, this form's not valid because, again, we're going to get one row for the department. But which lucky person is going to be the one that populates that name column? Well, I'll tell you what, the system's not going to try and figure it out. It'll just come back and say you've got an error because you have a problem with your group by. So it's the kind of thing, you've only got one spot once you say group per department, but you're probably going to have many employees and, you know, maybe many jobs. And the point being is the system's not going to try and figure out what in the heck you're trying to do. It'll just come back and say error. So that's why that form's not valid. Now, as you saw, what we are working for is a control break on the department number. So what we've got here now is B1 for break 1. Now you notice this is not the same as group, so we may have blank usage codes. They're allowed with control breaks. What this is saying is that I want to do a control break every time the department changes. Now it's real important too that you do an order by on your control break columns, or else what's going to happen if you have something like this, say 10, 10, 15, 15, 10. If you don't do the order by what you're breaking on, it will see this is one group, this is 2, and this is 3. Because it's just looking, did it change or not? If it did, it must be a control break. So that's why if you go back and you look at the original query on page 3-5, we've ordered by department, job descending, and name. So we did order by department so it can handle it. And you want to group all those departments together because it's not all that intelligent when dealing with control breaks. It's just looking and asking the question, the same department or a different one? If it's the same, keep rolling up the sum. If it's a different one, start a new sum, and so on. All right? So what we see now is on the bottom of page 2-24, and because of my panel, this is probably going to be a little crooked, but okay. And now we've got a group 15 and a group 20. Notice we didn't do anything over here with job. Okay, so the jobs will be listed out. We didn't, the sum just says give me a sum of the salaries. But that sum now is going to be both for control break and, of course, the grand total down here at the bottom remains consistent. But when you put sum on a control break like this, it doesn't suppress the detail. This is why you got to start thinking, what do I want in my results table? Because that's all I'm going to have to work with. If you've got too much, you can always crunch it. But you can't, expand it. You've only got to work with what's in your results table. So if you look at the report on page 3-24 that I just showed you, we're inching ever closer to the report we had that, was our goal for this section. And the only thing we're missing now, we're missing some control break text. And we also don't want to see, and let's see, that's still up there, so we can just turn that on. Remember, if you remember back to the report, we only showed 15 the one time. We don't want to keep seeing it again and again and again. All right, so how do we handle that? Well, we come in, and again, this is just more parts of form.main. You want to see where it is on the grand scheme, 3-7. Show you where everything is. We've got, we're dealing with break 1, okay? And so we said, do we want a new page for the break? No. Break 2 is really not applicable here because we don't have one. And again, that you could control break up to 6 deep. Makes for a pretty tricky thing to keep straight in your head, but it can be done if you want to. Okay? So we've said we don't want a new page. The outline is what's going to suppress those 15s. All right? That means that when we get a break, we put the header on once, and there we go. And then we don't want to see the department number again until it changes. Now, if you look here, default break text, that's talking about this star. Do you want it or not, or do you just want blank? Well, usually it's set to yes, but we're going to discuss that in a little greater detail because if you remember, we wanted some break text in there talking about this total and that total and so on. So the major points here are the yes suppresses the repetition of the item that we broke on. In this case, because of this, it's department. Okay? So if we had more than that, you know, it would do it within. And that's something you can play around with. And the default break text just says at the control break, do I put the star or not? Well, we don't want the star, let's say. And if you look here on page 3-26, by turning this to no and the outline off, we now then have replication of the department number, and we've gotten rid of the star. Okay, so we've just done that, but let's go on, and let's say, remember how we said we wanted to do department 15 total, department 20 total, and so on? Well, at break 1, what do I want as the footer of the control group? Well, I've said department ampersand 1 total. Now, this is what's known, anything with an ampersand in QMF is a variable. And what is ampersand 1 referring to? Sorry about there we go. This is good enough. Ampersand is going to look at the number. Now, when you're first starting out, there's a real confusion, and a lot of people tend to think that it might be the sequence. Remember, if we had a sequence here, and we did this 4, 3, 2, 1, that would then switch the order of the report around. All right? But when we're talking about ampersand 1, it's still going to look at the number, not the sequence. So keep that in mind. So we've said department, whatever's in number 1, and in this case it happens to be department number. Okay, and if we look back, that's really the column department from the table. And this will change with each break. It's pretty nifty because it allows for flexibility to the reports. And we're going to be working a lot with variables as time goes on. But for now, we'll just leave that at there, and that's a way that's a way we can get variables in. So now, if you look down at page 3-27, department, then you notice the ampersand 1, and in this case 1 is department number, and that's 15 at this point, and total. So now we've got break text. Because we said outline yes, we're only seeing the 15 once. Default break text would be if we had a control break that we didn't give it footing information for. Okay? It would pop a star in there. All right? But in this case, all our breaks have been defined. And keep in mind now, we're looking at a bunch. There's a form.break1, there's a form.break2, form.page, form.final, form.options. So what you want to think about form.main is what it is let's suppose that this little box is a bunch of forms. Well, form.main gives you like a little peephole into all of them. Now you can expand this because one of the things you might notice is, well, gee, that doesn't give me a lot for the footing. I mean, it's only giving me this much area. And you're right, it's not a lot. But if you wanted something a little bit more elaborate, you'd go into form.break1, and we'll discuss that as time goes on. Okay? So keep in mind, this form.main is a little bitty peephole to get you into form.page, final, break1, break2, form.options, and that kind of thing. Okay? So, okay, we've got a question in Endicott. You're on the air, Endicott. Go ahead.
Why didn't you say default break text no in this page 327?
Oh, in this case, it really wouldn't matter because we've overridden it. Okay, but in the case, let's go back to here. Let's suppose we did this B2, all right? And we went here, where is it? Now, if we didn't put anything in here for break 2, this will substitute the asterisks in that area. So usually that's left to That's left a yes, the default break text. And this depends on how you want the form to come out. Is that clear?
Thank you. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, in this case, though, the default break text is being overwritten by this because we only have the one control group. Good question, though, in Endicott. All right. So now, the last thing we're really missing here is at the bottom, we want a grand total line because if you look, let's go here. If you look here, this 87,000 is just kind of floating around out there. Not a whole lot of information there. So we put a final piece of text in, and we get the grand total line at the bottom, okay? There's only going to be one of those, though, all right? So the grand total now gets inserted, and if you look at the report on page 3-28, you've got the report we were looking for. The only thing we might want to do is maybe add a page header and footer. And again, these can become more elaborate, but you have to go into form.page. Keeping in mind form.main is just a peephole into some of these forms. And it's nice because it gives you a little area to work in where everything's, you know, common screen. So if you want more elaborate, you have to go to other areas of QMF. But in this case, we want to say division earnings report as the header and put company confidential on the top and bottom of each page. So division's the header, company confidential's the footer. And you can see the results on page 3-29. Now, if that's one of you calling me, I can't answer the phone while I'm on the air, so I'm just going to let it ring. Okay. So then you see on page 3-30 another example of form.main in its entirety, and that'll show you where all these things exist in regard to the scope of the page. Okay. Now, with that in mind, let's look at some PF keys, and a more complete list is on page 3-31, but we've got a couple of them in there, okay? Help, all right? That's a good one, especially, I'm going to get back to Raleigh on that concatenation thing, but when you get an error, if you hit help, sometimes it'll give you more descriptive information about the error. Check. What check does is it goes through and it will check the validity of your form. Make sure that if you use group, everything's got a usage code and all of that. Okay, and we see check is syntax checking only of the form. Has nothing to do with your SQL query. And again, the report's made up of data and form. All right, you can go up or down. Now this is something I'd like everyone to take a note on, okay, and write this right in your book. If you get a multi-page report, what you want to do, and just for now this is a performance thing, but it'll make you a more responsible user of the system. So let's assume here that here's our little computer screen, and just for argument's sake, it can hold 3 rows. But in our where clause, it returned, say, 9. So now we've got 2 more screens of data. So this would be screen 2, and this would be screen 3. All right? First thing you want to do when you get a multi-page thing, and this really should become a habit for all of you. Your DBAs will love you if you do this. And what you should do is go to the command line and type in, so the command line's here. That you can't see, can you? Command line is like this, and it's got the arrow. And you type in the word bottom, and then hit enter. The reason being, while you've got those other screens hanging and you haven't viewed them, and this can be a real killer if you pull up a multi-page report and go for a cup of coffee, you're holding locks all throughout the system. If you type in bottom, you go to the bottom of the report, bring in all the data into your data area, and then you're out of the database. If you don't, like the case I just showed you, you had 2 more screens, you're holding all the locks up. And this isn't like an internals class, but let's suffice it to say there's enough problems that I recommend you do this, all right? Because while other people can still read what you've got locked up, they can't update it, all right? And of course, we've already seen insert and delete. One thing to keep in mind is these PF keys change values, all right? Like on some of the forms, you need to hit PF12 to get out. instead of PF3, which is what you're normally used to. So keep an eye on the forms till you get a little bit used to it. All right? So, with that in mind, we've got the report scrolling. And for those of you familiar with this, your scrolling can be page, cursor, half, or you could put in a number of lines in there about how far you wanted to do, and you'll see that at the NN. Now, the other thing you could do is put in max here, and then hit PF8, and that'll do the same thing as typing in the bottom command. All right? So, and the one I always use is CSR for cursor, because that then will give you, let you position your cursor, say 6 lines down, and then when you hit PF8, it'll only go to where the cursor is. So it gives you a little bit more control over what's going on. So, with that in mind, the command line, okay, is here. That is where you type in the bottom command to get all your data into the temporary data area and get you out of the database itself. And if you see 3-33, one of the commands they have there is bottom, okay? Display report is the same thing as hitting PF9 from various areas, but remember the PF keys change. So, you know, in this case here in form.main, PF9 isn't even used because PF9 from the other panel is display the form. So keep that in mind. I'm sorry, PF12 would be display report. Okay, so that's some of the things. And you see the save command. That last one, we're going to discuss commands a little bit in greater detail as the course goes on. But keep in mind, you've got a temporary query area, temporary data, temporary form. All these areas are temporary. So if you sign off and you've got this whole big, long SQL query, and it took you forever to write and get it correct, and now you sign off, it's gone. Unless you save it permanently, as you see as the last bullet on page 3-33. Now, before we go on to that, let's just talk about what we've talked about. Column headings, break text, and grand total or final text. Usage codes, the outline. Do we want to replicate the stuff on the breaks? Spacing. We talked about width and overflow. Do we want new pages at certain times? How do we scroll? What are the edit codes? Headers and footers. Talked briefly about commands. Keep in mind that we're going to discuss commands on day 3. So we're going to get more into that on day 3. And column sequencing if you want to switch things around a little bit. So with that in mind, let's... now this one should come out good because it's on yellow paper here. So let's put this over here. And we'll turn this on because this is going to be the multiple choice guy here. Give me just a second to set up here. Okay. So now, if you could, by hitting your student response unit, here is the question, and here are your possible answers. You've worked all day on tailoring a report, and you can punch in at any time. Worked on all day on tailoring a report for a customer. The form in temporary storage has not been saved. The customer asks you to change the SQL order by clause to alter the report sequence. What should you do? Okay? And you can choose from 1 to 5, and they're over here on the left screen. So you can hit that now if you would. Okay, no one seems to be hitting this thing. There we go. We got a question. Hold on here. I don't think my thing's working here. Go ahead, Charlotte.
We can't read it.
Oh, you can't read it. I'm sorry.
Blurry.
Okay, let's try this then. The big switch. Can you read that one?
Yes.
Yeah, I think this camera's a little better. How's that?
That's good, thank you.
Okay. So do you tell the customer to go fish? Change the query and press PF2. Change the query and issue run query form equals form. Form equals form, by the way, means use the form that you've got in temporary storage. Change the query, save the form as F1, run the query form equals F1, or none of the above. Now what they want is the order by clause changed. Okay, they want the order by clause changed. Let's go, hold on just a second. Charlotte, are you still? Okay, there you go. A lot of buttons here. Dallas, go ahead, you're on the air.
You just change the query?
You could change the query, that's true. Okay, now that would probably be your best thing, because remembering that you can't really control, let me put myself back up here. You can't really control the order. You can in the sense that you can do grouping, but yes, you'd have to change the query and press PF2. Now changing the query and pressing PF2 would be the same as this. Okay, these both are the same because PF2 is the run query command, and if you don't give it a form, it's going to use the one in temporary storage. Okay, so that's the deal there. I'm sorry the student response unit didn't work so well in that particular case. Okay, that's what was messing me up. I had the mic on in the room. Okay, I'm telling you, this is just so you can get a feel for what's going on here. Some people like to see the studio here. I got all this stuff going on over here, and there's a lot of buttons going on, so if I miss one every now and then, I'm sorry. But then again, we're not the 6 o'clock news. I'm not a professional really at doing this. Well, I'm going to go sit at my house now for a while, and y'all can do your lab. And what we're going to do, for those of you, I don't see anyone on the West Coast, but we may be getting sent out there, and I might not know it. If you're on the West Coast, now would be a time for lunch because it's about 10 after 12. If you're on the East Coast, you can do your lab here. Okay, and we're going to take lab for roughly an hour and 7 minutes. And with that, I'm going to sign off. The lab begins on page 3-35, and it's all about using the formats. Again, I will be in the studio unless I put up a message like I did before. So with that, I am going to sign off, and whoever was calling me on the phone, you can call back now and I'll answer it, but I can't answer when I'm on the TV. So with that, I'm signing off, and I'll see you in roughly an hour and a few minutes. I'll put the little clock up in a moment. Thank you. Hello, Raleigh. Hello, Raleigh. Is anyone there? Okay, who had the question about concatenation? Can you do me a favor and call me up on the tie line, 892-4449? Because I can't... Oh, hold on. Yes, it will. I'm in a studio with an extra long mic wire. It normally doesn't reach. So let's see what we can do here. Okay. It just barely makes it here. Okay. Let me sign on, and then we will we'll see what you want, what you got here. IBM, CED, SO, UG. 77. And it's INA 023. Okay, just give me a minute, Raleigh. I'm signing on here. And A023. Hey, how's the course going so far? You picking it up? Okay, good. I try with the 5 points to make it a little less boring. Pardon me? Oh, yeah. I want to. Believe it or not, I want to tape that music off the show, and bring in a little tape recorder. Let's see here. I'm looking for this on my menu. I've got a different deal than you guys do. and I don't see it. I'm sorry to hold you up. Just give me a minute here. I'm working on it. I think I had my procedure wrong here. ECSTSO, that's what we want. Oh, okay. Let me just get in here. Everything looks good. I don't know why it didn't just take me right into QMF. Are you guys going right into QMF when you sign on? Yeah, you see mine's not doing that here. Well, I'll do it in Spoofy. Okay. Well, I could do this here in Spoofy. Just it'll be the same thing. Spoofy, by the way, is just more an online thing. It's a little less user-friendly. Okay, now tell me exactly what you've got written. Oh, yeah, I hear you. Well, let's run it now and see what happens. Ha ha ha. Yeah, it's telling me it's invalid too, so we'll hit PF2 and see what we got. I think I know the problem there. I just got to refer back to the table data. I think they're of different types. Let's see, department and job, right? Yeah, that's the problem because one's small integer and one's character. So let's do name with the job rather than department, and that way they're both character. Let's see here. No, it won't do like numeric concatenated with yeah, it can't handle that. I'm just going to concatenate name and job and see how that works. Okay. Yeah, if you do name and job, that'll work. That one took me a minute to think about there, but that's the reason. Okay, hold on here. PF6. Can you spell commission for me? I'm not sure how it's in the table. That's it, right? And salary is spelled out? Okay, let's try that. Yeah, it doesn't like that either. The data type length or value specified. See, that deal there is just for character. I guess I should have made that a little bit more clear. In fact, let me go nationwide. I'm not sure who's in the room. Just a note, I'm on the line with Raleigh here, and this is out to the rest of the country. That concatenation operator, they were having the problem because that only works on character fields. So keep that in mind. You might want to write that down in your book. Thanks. Okay, now it's just us, Raleigh. All right, so we figured that one out. Took me a while. Couldn't figure out how to get into QMF from here, but. Well, you know, you could kind of get around it by making what's called a shadow table and just store everything in there as character, including the decimal point. You know, that's a way around it. It's not the best solution, but it would get you where you want to go. All right, Raleigh? Oh, well, then you're golden then. Okay, my pleasure. Thanks for calling in. You might have had about the last lab. That's probably the one, if you're going to be doing reporting in your area, that the forms are real important, and we're going to delve deeper into them tomorrow, and then commands will be on the third day. Just a note, what we're going to do is go until 4 o'clock Dallas time, and then there's a lab that will be completed either this afternoon for West Coast and Mountain. Central, you've got your own, you make a call on that if you're in the Central time zone, because it'll be 4 o'clock, so you've got an hour for the lab. But tomorrow, we will not start the lecturing till 10 o'clock Dallas time. That's 11 in New York and 8 in California.